So, I think we've all been there, the entire country in disarray, every major or minor institution, including your university, on strike, and all you're left to do is to sit in the dark and marinate in the fact that 2 of your cousins were kidnapped and by one of those funny-looking fellas for a major crime of standing on a sidewalk while protesting dictatorship. So it is one of those days and it's cold and loud. I'm wearing pink swimming goggles, a yellow raincoat, and a gas mask, and I look like the most badass dystopian alien warrior, and a 5-year-old at the same time. But you wanna know what both badass female warrior aliens and 5-year-olds actually have in common? They all need to pee at some point. Thankfully, there's a mall right next to the place we usually go to volunteer ourselves as punching bags for Faceless Vader cosplaying Nazis. So I go, do not choose the first floor. There are too many exhausted, desperate people waiting to also pee there. I go up a few more floors, stand in the nearest bathroom line, and look over to my left. And then there are again, assembled up like dominoes of death. There was probably some Harry Styles song playing in the background, white mat walls, some bothered Russians shopping at a local H&M, and us. Of course. And I know 5 minutes after this very moment, the second we leave this building, you're going to be dragging some 19-year-old girl by her hair down the street. One of you will be someone's skull open for a $100 bonus. Maybe one of you even beat my cousin, who knows? But for now, here we are, peaceful, equal, full-bladdered victims of mundane human biology. But now enough of real-life fascism, let's talk about a fictional one. Right next to this mall, on that very street, there's a square, where there used to be a state bank a century before. Every time, and I mean every time I walk past it with someone, I point at it and tell them a story I once read in a book. In the year 1907, a young Georgian man named Yosef Jurashvili is running into that very square at the center of the Georgian capital. He runs out with stolen 241,000 rubles and sends it over to fund a little indie anti-imperialist movement. The young gangster would be later known as Joseph Stalin, and the movement was the Bolshevik movement, the heist organized by Lenin and Stalin respectively. More than a century later, Tony Gilroy also comes across this very story in the same book as I, and uses it as an inspiration for the formative turning point of the rebellion, the Aldani heist, in his little Star Wars show, Stalin posing as an inspiration for Cassian Andor and Vladimir Lenin for Luthen. Fast forward to now, the same street that inspired the Aldani heist, here I am peeing next to my own imperial hats. And when I tell you that there's no piece of fiction that has ever even come close to replicating and accurately capturing the paralyzing terror and the laughable absurdity of this very moment more accurately than a secondary Star Wars show about a secondary Star Wars character from a secondary Star Wars movie. And then you ask, yeah, but is it Star Wars though? Before we start, we have to address the elephant in the room that is Andor Star Wars? And my answer to that question would be to throw it back at you and tell you to ask me a better fucking question. Art should not be evaluated on such degrading and vague metrics as whether or not it fits some person's subjective standards for a particular franchise. And I say subjective because ultimately I believe that there's no singular 100% true objective definition of what Star Wars is, or a set-in-stone criteria a show must meet to be Christianed as a part of it. Especially considering that at this point more than 50% of the franchise as is tonally, thematically, canonically, and narratively inconsistent messy pile of fucking nonsense. In order to figure out if Andor is Star Wars, we need to be able to first define what Star Wars even is. And at this point, that's just a paradox, because Star Wars is everything and nothing at the same time. It's a collectible on your shelf, it's a shampoo bottle, it's a space opera, a political drama, a comedy, a tragedy, a piece of shit, a romance story, science fiction. It's fun, it's lazy, it's boring, it's a Lego set, it's a Lego game, it's a Funko Pop. And for Andor, this conversation is doubly insulting because, unlike most of Disney's other content, the show does not break canon, or mess with the chronology or world building, or invent new narratives and themes for the franchise. More so, it goes out of its way to mostly, if not only reference and go off of already existent, written and established lore and material from dozens of years ago for its chronology, events, right down to the singular actions of OG characters it utilizes.
They got themselves, I guess, into a pickle with something called Star Wars Legends. And there was a story of Grand Moff Tarkin landing on the Palmo Plaza, or landing on the Ghorman Plaza, it wasn't named Palmo, landing on the Ghorman Plaza and killing a bunch of people. Then there is the Ghorman massacre that prompted Mon Mothma to leave the Senate, which is very specifically has to happen at 2 BBY. Yeah. So they had a dissonance in their own lore. And one of the things we've done a couple places in this show is we've managed to, make everything work. So it was a cool opportunity to make all of that work. We have the Tarkin story, and we have the memorial, and we have the whole thing, and we have and we're time-wise canonically true.
This argument is solely based on the idea that people feel that Andor isn't spiritually Star Wars, meaning its tone is off. There aren't enough lightsabers or Force users, which makes their judgment even more baseless and subjective, since it isn't driven by facts as much as by emotions. And such conversations further perpetuate the damaging surface-level, lazy, and limiting understanding and reading of Star Wars as a sci-fi thing purely characterized by space wizards, laser swords, and spaceships. This entire argument is an unfortunate side effect of the fact that Star Wars has become such a disappointing, inconsistent, loose canon that it involuntarily gave its own audience an illusion of power, of being able to selectively decanonize and disown things that they personally don't vibe with. So now, instead of saying it's not the Star Wars I prefer, we say it's not Star Wars. Period. Is X a true Y is a redundant question that gets entangled in baseless semantics and distracts from the actually important conversations and or real, valid and grounded criticism we could be instead having about media and art. Now, back to fascists in a bathroom. Evilness is quite a funny thing if you think about it. It's funny how easily digestible these idiots are in their little costumes. They seem almost f***ing alien, to be honest with you. And yes, it is much more comfortable to think of them as Terminators as opposed to potential classmates or next-door neighbors. However, seeing them in this very stripped, vulnerable state and having to directly face their humanness is highly uncomfortable and ironically dehumanizing. And that is a sole example of why in fiction we tend to favor disfigured, disguised, extraterrestrial mechanical beings as our villains, because it is much more comfortable than facing the truth, which is in that some other timeline or universe that could be me doing all that shit. Since we like to imagine ourselves as higher beings that can do no wrong, we often tend to externalize and banish the mere concept of being able to do wrong as inhuman, something other, because our egos are too fucking fragile for the truth. Therefore, what 99% of fiction usually does is it draws a concrete line between you and the evil. The evil is always distinct. They come with their own ominous tunes, harsh lines, helmets, prosthetics, high cheekbones, distinctly villainous faces and voices, and the type of apathy and sociopathy that could only ever be attributed to an insentient murderous weapons. They're too far removed to feel familiar or to even seem as the same species as you. However, the dangerous side effect of externalizing the evil is also disassociating from it. Less human our villains are, less inhuman their actions come across, and consequentially over time our perception of them gets as disfigured and warped as is their physicality. That's why if it's a big fat snail alien trying to our female character, we don't call that essay, we call that a children's movie. We write off a villain's vile actions as a given, therefore it becomes easier for us to either stay neutral, like in the case of Jabba, or focus on things that have nothing to do with their morality, and most of the time those things are quite positive, like their presentation, voices, demeanor, strength, authority, power, and sooner or later we find ourselves buying their action figures, rooting for them, even defending them, which is a scary prospect, especially for a franchise like Star Star Wars, where our bad guys are literal stand-ins for fascists. Now, let's imagine if Jabba was, let's say, an Imperial officer enforcing that same power dynamic onto a woman, but this time without catering to our fantasies or stroking our egos by having a slimy giant caterpillar do it instead. Suddenly, SA wouldn't belong in Star Wars, would it? And contrary to popular belief, there's no on-screen in Andor, and the fact that it is the mere implication that an evil, genocidal, authoritarian, fascist, war crime committing tyranny would commit such an act is what gets people this riled up, is itself a testament of how sterilized and, dare I say, romanticized the Empire has gotten by all these people, which is itself a further evidence of how far Star Wars itself has strayed from its original themes, narratives, and intentions. So far, in fact, that you have Star Wars fans themselves defending the honor and reputation of authoritarian dictatorships against bad press like some kind of loyal virtual stormtroopers. The very franchise that once used to be one of the most influential and important pieces of fiction advocating against fascism and imperialism has now grown so sterile and spineless in its depiction of it that it has indirectly fed into the romanticization of the very thing it swore to destroy. And then there comes Andor, putting all those villains in a bathroom queue, reintroducing nuance, just judgment, and consequences into the Star Wars world. We get to watch our villains eat, sleep, converse with their parents, develop relationships, fail, succeed, fail again, the casual trivialities of everyday life that make the ease with which they can carry out sadistic and monstrous acts all the more chilling. Andor does not get blinded by often romanticized glamour or power associated with tyranny. It cuts through it. It highlights the superficiality, restrictiveness, and soullessness behind the fact that the supportive system feeding off of others' misery only ever echoes that same misery back in luxurious clothes and settings. We watch simple conversations in simple rooms by a handful of simple people somehow conclude with the loss of thousands of lives. And this is what makes Andor so important. By humanizing the Empire on screen, it effectively dehumanizes them in the eyes of the audience. And the resulting outrage from people who used to personally sympathize and identify with them is a testament of how well Andor manages to reclaim the core values and message of Star Wars.
Start! Fight the Empire!
To antagonize the tyranny and fight against it at any cost. What makes a person want to destroy a planet? Is it belief in the cost? Or do they recognize their own immorality, but still go through it for the personal gain? Andor answers these questions through characters like Cyril Karn and Dedra. We see the Empire through contrasting lenses of two characters who, on surface, are very similar, dedicated, loyal, and somewhat obsessive Imperial servants. But as the context and lore surrounding and grounding the Empire slowly grows, not only for the viewer but also for characters themselves, we start to see them react accordingly, which we've never seen before. Imperial agents, officers, troops have always been one-dimensionally reliable in their sociopathy. But here we are invited to see Dedra secludedly but shakily deal with her own conscience. We get the pleasure or displeasure of witnessing Cyril's entire worldview shatter before his eyes. Both characters going through the same realization, but coming to drastically different conclusions. Dedra preferring the status and power that comes with tyranny, while Cyril simply flees. Finn is the only other character from the franchise that goes through somewhat of a similar arc. He rebels against the system that has been brainwashing and grooming him ever since he was a toddler, after witnessing them slaughter people. But differently from TFA, Andor actually recognizes that ethics and morality is not inherited instinct embedded in us from birth. It is a very fragile and impressionable set of belief systems, primarily dictated by our environment. Such a level of moral indoctrination is not a trance you can just break out of. Foregoing it implies foundational reprogramming of your entire state of being. And those kinds of epiphanies do not come easily just from witnessing violence. What it takes is a true 100% absolute certainty, along with foolproof evidence that what you're witnessing is not the end justifying the means, but a brutal display of undeniable and unjustifiable evil.
How long have you known about all this?
How long?
And even then it takes true bravery, integrity, and sanity to accept that fact and do something about it. Hence I would say that therefore Ghorman Massacre is one of the most important sequences in Star Wars history for accomplishing just that, but I don't think so. I think it is the most important one. Don't get me wrong, Ghorman Massacre is not the most memorable sequence in all of Star Wars. It's not the most iconic, spectacular, cinematic, or the flashiest. I'm not even saying that it is the best one, but it is by far the most important. An evil emperor wants to get a hold of evil minerals for his evil weapon, therefore wipes out the entire planet to get to mine it freely and completely. Usually this would result in the type of scene where Palpatine flicks his wrist, second-long deafening boom, and it's done. As simple and quick as it is impersonal. It's almost like we're experiencing the story from the eyes of a villain, the final boss, with no regard or comprehension for thousands of lives that were momentarily wiped to dust. And Andor has the nerve to ask, wait, how would this exact story play out from a perspective of a hero? Or an Imperial soldier that was dispatched and asked to give out the order, to pull the trigger, because somebody obviously had to? Or is everything done with lightsabers and force pulls in this universe? Tony Gilroy, while referencing Cyril and Andor's showdown in the episode, has mentioned that though their fight was tense and suspenseful, it is also something the audience has seen in every movie or show ever, so it was easy to get it right. However, what happens on the Ghorman Square is by far the most untraditional, unconventional, and complicated fights to get across. And no, it is not too dark or too much for Star Wars, since the Ghorman Massacre, both in name and in context, has been a thing since the good old year of 1990. Even Mon Mothma's speech and it being the reason for her leaving the Senate was first mentioned there. It is not an adult leftist political mumbo-jumbo made up by Tony Gilroy to personally piss you off, little Timmy. Here's a Vader lollipop for you. For a non-Star Wars fan who doesn't deserve a Star Wars show, Tony Gilroy sure has a way of putting my own fanness to shame. Yes, people get violated and brutally murdered, just like they have always been in this galaxy for dozens of movies since the 1970s, except this time there are no cool booms, blasts, or pews to distract you from the fact. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that witnessing genocide is not as fun as it used to be, and that Star Wars forces you to sit with the consequences of it happening. How dare they? I can excuse wiping out entire planets in a blink of an eye in my children's movie, but I draw the line at zooming in at it. I mean, there's a difference between seeing a simple boom and seeing people get literally choked or their burnt skeletons on the ground. Am I right? Ghorman Massacre could have been in order. It also could have been a throwaway sentence. Or if our director/dictator was feeling ambitious, it could have been dispatching a bunch of stormtroopers and impersonally lasering people off the planet. But these kinds of storytellers get so excited to be able to get to use stormtroopers, they end up throwing them around like soulless action figures. Hence the overusage and, most importantly, misusage of the literal military does them disservice. It trivializes their mere existence, devaluing their power and authority. By putting an embargo and limiting their presence, Andor actually manages to make stormtroopers feel terrifying for once. On Ghorman Square, they don't appear right away, nor do they appear excessively, because the show understands that stormtroopers are no guards, laborers, or technicians. They are the striking force, the last resort for the Empire. They're designated trained assassins, which a lot of Star Wars stories tend to forget, either due to stupidity or because they're too lazy to dedicate actors, costumes, and thought process to lower, less flashy ranks. And as a payoff for such restraint, the moment the stormtroopers appear on Ghorman Square, the threat and a promise of chilling death is instantly communicated to us as viewers, making their entrance absolutely terrifying. Every now and then we get a shot of them looming over the Ghorman Square like predators waiting to be fed. And the episode's use of stormtroopers is just a drop in the ocean compared to how accurately depicted and spectacularly choreographed this entire sequence is. To give an extensively detailed example of just how much of a masterpiece it is, I am going to give you Dummy's guide of how demonstrations and crackdowns usually unfold, based on my very personal and extensive experience. Whenever an evil government plans to do something up, they prepare in advance for the civil reaction by mobilizing their forces within the confines of whatever building they seclude themselves in. Once the information reaches the civilians, they impromptu gather around that same building or the main square. They start to chant, sing, whistle to entertain themselves and express their pent-up emotions. The government registers the growing noise around them and they set off alarms. The non-lethal forces are dispatched, surrounding the area, pushing civilians back, crushing and jamming them together. This is when plastic bottles, pebbles, and slurs start to fly. Contacting each other through technological services becomes infinitely harder, either because the government suppresses the signal so the information does not leak out or leak in, or due to simple crowdedness and noise. But like a clockwork, the government starts to grow tired. They want to go home.
Everything as you want it?
What I want's a comfortable ride home.
So, the provocators get to action. The provocators are usually planted in the surrounding area in civilian clothing, either spurring and compelling people around to get violent, themselves get physically aggressive towards the special forces, throw Molotov cocktails around, or all at the same time. The inevitable following chaos is used by the government as a pretext to violently civilians. And the next morning, while catching up on local news, the state media will report violent protesters and defenseless innocent heroes of the state. Just to be clear, this isn't me recapping the episode. This is me exclusively referencing my own experience. And the fact that Andor lines up with it almost perfectly is probably a sign of bad writing. So bored. Where are my lightsabers? Palpatine, Vader, and Stormtrooper soldiers are immortalized symbols of tyranny and imperialism. They're often most kids' first introduction to those concepts, and for many adults, the first image that comes to mind when the terms are mentioned. Heck, even a simple Google search for the Emperor doesn't give you one of history's hundreds of tyrants, it shows you a fucking Palpatine. That's how influential Star Wars is on our understanding of the world. These ambitious, simple narratives and concepts in Star Wars are universal and timeless, but that does not make them eternal. The concept of the grand, big conflict between the Empire and Rebellion is not an inexhaustible resource. If we keep going around the same eternal loop, exploring and re-exploring the broad strokes of the world, we will run out of things to say, which we did dozens of years ago. Star Wars is a great example of what happens when a franchise refuses to adapt and progress along with the world surrounding it, stuck in its formative state, retelling the same story of the same conflict with the same power dynamics that are tired, no longer novel or all that profound to the modern audiences. Because the truth is, things that were revolutionary to a person in 1977 are still relevant to a modern viewer, but that does not keep those things from becoming primitive. To stay true to its core values and intentions, Star Wars needed to introduce more nuance or stagnate forever, and that is exactly what Andor has to offer. And in all honesty, many simply do not care to tell stories such as these. Majority would not even take an interest in something so trivial from the outside and tangled from the inside. If the original Star Wars was a reflection of struggles of its times, Andor, Luthen, Ghorman are mere reflection of ours, colored in with crayons of dystopia and sci-fi. And if that isn't Star Wars at its best, I don't know what is.